All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see everybody. Thank you for joining us in our nightly class. Tonight we are learning again the Haggadah, and we are on the sixth part to exploring the Haggadah. So thank you everyone for coming, and I would like to mention and thank tonight's sponsors. Tonight is co-sponsored by, firstly, the Friedman family, Ron and Eileen Friedman, along with their children David and Chelsea, and Rachel, Jacob, and Jordana Salzberg. For a very sad and meaningful note, their dear friend, Mrs. Beverly Heltzer, passed away a couple days ago and was buried today. She was 84 years old, and she contracted COVID-19 along with her long-standing boyfriend, Mr. Fred Sands, who passed away 2 days prior also due to the COVID-19 virus. So with a heavy heart, we are very sorry to announce the passing, and tonight's class is going to be in both of their memory, that may their memory, may their souls be raised and always remembered for good. Beverly left behind 2 daughters, Lori and Shari, and 4 grandchildren, Eric, Jeffrey, Tyler, and Sloan, and also 2 great-grandchildren, Gabe and Max. So may they all remember her always for the good and follow in her footsteps. She was a very loving, funny, warm, kind person, someone who spoke her mind, and she was also a beautiful mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. This is our first sponsor for this evening. Our second is for the refuah shlema of 2 other individuals. Number 1 is Chazan Yitzchak Meir Halfgott. Sorry if I didn't pronounce that right. And also for refuah shlema for Shlomo ben Marcel Biton that we've been praying for all week. May all of those who are ill, who've contracted any illness, have a refuah shlema, a speedy recovery, them and amongst all the other sick people in the world, and specifically in the Jewish nation. Without any further ado, we are going to proceed with this evening's class, and we are picking up where we left off Tuesday night. Tuesday night, we were explaining the different verses that are said in the Haggadah as part of the Bikurim offering. The Bikurim offering, as we said, was when the Jewish people were going to come to the land of Israel, they would give a quick recap of Jewish history and thanking God for this first fruits that they had. So in the Haggadah, towards the end of the Maggid portion, we mention 4 out of the 6 of these verses, and we expound upon them with other relevant sources of other psukim, other verses, as well as teachings from our sages. At the end of the 4th pasuk, verse, is when we mention the 10 plagues. And we said that the custom is to have a bowl and to pour wine, or to pour wine and water together in the bowl for each of the 10 plagues. We mentioned that 3 pourings are poured before, for dam, va'esh, and timroshet ashan, which alludes to the blood, the fire, and the pillar of smoke, which is what the Jewish people did for bringing the korban Pesach, the Paschal sacrifice, and then 10 times for each of the plagues, and then another 3 times for the acronym that Rabbi Yehuda gave, which was Detzach, Adash, and Be'achav, and we explained all that. Okay, we did pass over the 10 plagues last class, so tonight we are going to spend, it would be an incomplete seder, or Maggid, or telling over of the story of Passover, if we would skip over the great miracles that took place for the 10 plagues. So the beginning of tonight's class is going to be going through, and again in a brief manner, the 10 plagues, specifically answering why was the plague brought, what was the midah keneged midah, the measure for measure, why did God administer that plague specifically, as well as what were the damages included for the Egyptian people, and which other miracles took place specific to that plague. So we're going to do it as brief as possible. It's important to note that the overall idea of having 10 plagues, as we mentioned last class, was in order that God should teach the Egyptian people a great lesson, and we mentioned many other things in that realm as well. There's so much to say, we can't say everything, obviously. There was something that I put a note here to share. Give me a moment. Yes. Okay. I want to share this from the Ben Ish Chai as an introduction to the 10 plagues. And why is it that God couldn't wipe out, or of course he could have, but why didn't he wipe out the Egyptian people and teach them one strong lesson? So he gives a beautiful parable. It's super short and it's super amazing. He says, imagine two people, and they're walking on their way, and at one point, one of them finds a bag full of $10,000. Whew. How happy would anyone be? Raise your hands, everyone. All right, one person's not raising their hand. Why not? Okay, everyone would be happy if you find $10,000 on the floor. Come on, okay? Okay, Eileen has 2 hands up. Perfect. So, that's one individual. Now, let's compare, says the Ben Ish Chai, the second individual. The second individual's walking, and they find $1,000. Who would be happy if they found $1,000? Everyone raise your hand. Of course you'd be happy if you find $1,000. Okay. Then another 2 minutes later, they find another $1,000. Happy again. And another 2 minutes, another 1,000. And that happens 10 times over. Which of the two had a greater experience? The first or the second? And everyone will all know, very good, you're putting up the fingers, it's obviously the second person. The second person felt the same joy as the first person, meaning they're both going home with $10,000, but the second person experienced that joy of finding something, finding a gift 10 times over. The Ben Ish Chai explains that was God's intention in producing 10 plagues against Pharaoh and the Egyptian people. It was to teach the Jewish people, not once, not twice, 10 times in 10 different facets, how great HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. That can be found on page 144 in the Ben Ish Chai Haggadah. I just want to make a note that the link that we sent out was for the Hebrew version. The English version is, as I originally said, discontinued, unfortunately. I maybe did see a gouged price single volume on Amazon if it wasn't taken already, but it would be, in my opinion, it would be worth the gouged price. But again, that's the Ben Ish Chai's Haggadah, my favorite Haggadah ever. All right, that was on page 144. Now, let's go quickly through all of the 10 plagues. The first is blood, makat dam. The obvious question is, why was that the first out of 10 plagues? There must be some significance to it. Well, we have 2 different answers. The Midrash Rabbah tells us that since Pharaoh was arrogant, and he felt that he was the owner and even the creator of the Nile, so that's why God started specifically with the Nile River. You may sing, well, where do we know that from? Look at the following verse. Does everyone see the verse in Ezekiel chapter 29, verse 3? It says, we're not going to, okay, we'll read the whole thing. Daber v'amarta ko amar Hashem Elokim hineni alecha paro melech Mitzrayim hatanim hagadol harovetz betoch yeorav asher amar li yeori va'ani asitini. Look at this. Speak as you shall, so says the Lord God. Behold, I am upon you, O Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great crocodile that lies down in the midst of its rivers, who said, alluding to Pharaoh himself, Pharaoh said, my river is my own, and I made it myself. Pharaoh, in his arrogance, tells us, the prophet Yechezkel, Pharaoh, in his arrogance, truly believed that not only was he a god, that he created the Yeor, the Nile River, which served as a god for the Egyptian people. So God said, you know what? The first plague is going to attack and completely pulverize what they call their god and what their leader claims to have created it. That is the reason for the first. The second answer given why the Yeor, the Nile River, was attacked first was to embarrass Mitzrayim, to embarrass the Egyptian people, that their god is going down first. Normally a king, a god, the strongest, the ruler, is going to go down last. But no, God said that's going to be the first one that goes down. So why specifically the Nile? Is there a reason why the Egyptians deserve that their Nile was destroyed? And there is. There's multiple reasons. I'm only going to share 3 of them with you, but there are multiple reasons. The first reason is because those nasty Egyptians withheld the women, the Jewish women, after their menstrual cycle to go to the mikveh. And by them not going to the mikveh, in essence, what the Egyptians were doing was they did that on purpose to stop them to have children. And obviously with the flushing of a woman's cycle is obviously a cause of blood, and that was caused by the Egyptians not allowing the women, the Jewish women, to go to the mikveh. That's the first answer. Second answer is the Egyptians themselves threw the babies, as we know, all the baby boys that were born, threw them in the Nile River. The Nile River was something which had so much innocent blood in it. So God activated all that innocent blood and made it all bloody. The third answer is because those Egyptians, those nasty Egyptians, they would kill 300 babies a day. They would slaughter them and use their blood in order for Pharaoh to bathe himself in, because he contracted leprosy and he thought that that's a way that he was going to be healed from it. So for those reasons, blood was attacked, and blood was attacked to their Nile. Now, the damages included in the Nile River plague, the plague of blood, was there was no drinking water at all for Egyptians. Even any water they had at home, even if it didn't come from the Nile, any water at all that an Egyptian had turned to blood. All the fish died in the Nile River naturally, and that was a proof that the Nile River was not just food coloring, it was actually real blood, as fish can't live in blood. And also the Nile stunk, and it was all spoiled because of not only the blood, but also the fish. These were included in the damages. Listen to 3 main miracles that took place during this plague. Again, I'm not giving you everything and all the background of the plague. I'm just giving you a couple tidbits in order to bring it alive to us right before, hopefully even during the Seder. Miracles included were, number 1, that the blood not only came from the Nile River, but it also oozed out of all other fruits, trees, rocks, and even the Egyptians' own idols. It was that serious. The Jewish people were blessed with the first plague, and they were able to sell water because all of their water stayed to be water, and they were able to sell drinking water to the Egyptians, and they sold it for money. The word money in Hebrew is referred to as damim. Damim also sounds like the word dam, blood. The third great miracle that took place was that a Jew and an Egyptian would be able to be in the same place and even drink from the same cup or same bowl, and the Jew would be drinking water and the Egyptian would be drinking blood unless they purchased it from the Jew. And that's also alluded to in the word dam, blood, dalid and mem, because dalid refers to dam and mem refers to maim, meaning for this one it was blood, and for this one it was water. Moving on to the next plague, the second plague, and that was tzfardea, frogs. So why were the Egyptians punished with frogs? Listen to the answer the Midrash Tanchuma gives. Again, this is one of many. The answer that the Midrash Tanchuma gives is that since the Egyptians used to come and wake up the Jews from their windows in early in the morning, and sometimes even in the middle of the night, and would scream at them like frogs to torment them, to get them to wake up very early to come and start their slave labor. So God would do the same to them. God would come with a scary noise with the frogs that they didn't stop all day and all night. They did not stop screaming. It was 1 week, 7 days full of chaos and really torturing the Egyptians. And God did this on purpose to pay them back for them coming and screaming at and torturing the Jews. I didn't say this in the beginning, I just want to remind everybody, according to most opinions, every plague took 7 days, and there was a 3-week period until the next one. So for argument's sake, like Rosh Chodesh, although it wasn't exactly, but let's say Rosh Chodesh every month for 7 days, and then there was 3 weeks break. And then the beginning of the next month, there was 7 days of plague, and then 3 weeks break. That's how it was. So that's why I said it was 7 days of non-stop screaming and yelling that these frogs were doing. Damages included in the plague of frogs were in every house, every oven, every cupboard, every drawer, anywhere a person could imagine, even in the Egyptian stomachs. The whole country stunk of frogs. We know frogs and toads and the like don't smell too good. And the way this plague actually came about is that one single frog came out of the Nile River, and when it came out, it was chirping and it was making a lot of noise. It was driving them crazy. So in the Egyptians' anger, they took sticks and they started beating. They started hitting this frog, and every time they hit the frog, either it opened its mouth and more frogs came out, or it just duplicated itself with every hit. And that's how billions of frogs took over Egypt. And this answers why this plague is referred to in singular. See, the next one, lice, is kinim. It's not one louse, it was many lice. So why is this plague called frog? Tzfarde'a. It should have said Tzfardeim. And the answer is, as Rashi explains, because one frog was the original plague. The Egyptians made it even worse for them when they started beating it. The next plague, the third plague, is the plague of lice kinim. Why were the Egyptians punished with lice? Tells us Rabbeinu Bechaye on his commentary on the Torah. He says that the Egyptians withheld the Jews from bathing. Not only did they torture them mentally, emotionally, but they even physically did not allow the Jews to bathe themselves, which caused great pain to their body. So God said, I'm going to do the same back to them. We're going to punish them in a similar way, and there's going to be a great pain on their body. And that was the plague of lice. Damages included were not only were lice all over the Egyptian people, which were like pins, like digging into their skin, but also all of the Egyptian animals had lice, and that irritated them tremendously as well. The fourth plague, the plague of Arov, which means wild beasts. Why specifically were wild beasts sent to Egypt? So just to get a good picture of what it means to be wild beasts, anyone who has a beautifully illustrated Haggadah should take a look at the 10 plagues. They're normally very, very well drawn out and illustrated. So if you look at all of these plagues, they all explain beautiful, beautiful interpretations through the pictures. But if you look, it really gives you an idea when you look at those type of Haggadahs when it comes to the pictures for this plague, the fourth plague of wild beasts, because you have all different types of animals, all different wild types of animals, all in Egypt, which was a tremendous miracle because all types of animals are not found in the same climate and don't live, so to say, in harmony. Normally when you have different types of animals, they're eating and fighting against each other. In this case, part of the miracles were that the animals came to Egypt with their own habitat, comfortable, and they were in unison, they were in peace with each other because they had a goal to attack the Egyptians. Other miracles that took place during this plague was that the Egyptians were being attacked and the Jews weren't, even though they were one right next to another. Also, the wild animals only were all over Egypt, excluding Eretz Goshen, the place where the Jews used to live. Why were animals sent? To what reason did God punish the Egyptians with sending animals towards them? The Kli Yakar explained that since the Jewish people were treated by the Egyptians as animals in their hard torture and slavery, God sent animals back to them. Now, the Abarbanel gives a different interpretation. He says that the animals went into each and every one of the Egyptians' houses and started snatching their children. Just as the Egyptians did to the Jews. They would go into the Jewish households and snatch their children, either to kill them or to work them hard in their slavery. So, as a payback for that, they were sent with animals to their houses. One more great miracle that took place for the plague of wild animals was that none of these beautiful animals, right, as scary as lions and tigers and cheetahs and all type of wild animals are, they're also very scary, but they're very beautiful. It wasn't like God just let them stay there so the Egyptians could add them to their zoo, or he didn't have them die there so they could use their bodies or their hide as something noble or worthy or worth money. No. At the end of this plague, each and every one of these animals left Egypt. None of them were benefited by any of the Egyptians. The fifth plague is Dever, which is pestilence, was a tremendous plague that took place for all of the livestock of the Egyptian people, all of their farm animals. Why was this specifically sent to the Egyptians? Well, the Stipler explains that God wanted to show his control of the world, and that only the Egyptian animals and all of the animals in Egypt were the ones that died, and none of that of the Jew. Normally, as we see unfortunately nowadays, a virus and a plague and pestilence alike don't see any difference, not in race, not in skin color, not in religion, in no way. So all the more so for animals. If the animal was owned by a Jew, no problem. If the animal was owned by an Egyptian, that was when they dropped dead. So that was a very, very big miracle that God was showing in his difference between showing his control and power of the world. Another interpretation is given that since the Egyptians used to have the Jews work the land just as animals do. They had the Jews plowing the land. They had the Jews transporting items just as animals normally do. So God showed the Egyptian people that, oh, you really don't need your animals, right? Because you're using other people? We'll get rid of those animals for you. Miracles included in this tremendous plague were that not even one of the Jewish animals died. Even if one of the Jewishly owned animals were old or sick, they still survived. The sixth plague, the plague of Shechin, boils. Why was boils a punishment to the Egyptian people? So the answer given is that we mentioned it a little earlier, that the Egyptian philosophers and stargazers came to Pharaoh and they said that Jewish baby blood will heal you from your tzarat, from your leprosy, so they killed them. Boils is something which causes leprosy. So God came and punished the entire Egyptian nation with boils for that horrible act that they did by murdering, unfortunately, Jewish babies, innocent babies. Miracles included was that the way this plague was brought was a beautiful way. The Midrash Rabbah explains this, that normally when you throw something up, even an arrow, it doesn't go too far because it's working against gravity. All the more so if you pick up a clobber of dirt or dust or ashes and throw it up. Well, the Torah tells us that the way that this plague was brought was through God telling Moses to go and take a handful, very little, a handful of ashes from a furnace and throw it up to the sky. When Moses did so, it went up all the way to God's throne, Kisei Kavod, God's heavenly throne where he sits, and then it came down showering all over Egypt. And while it showered down, anything that it touched, which obviously went specifically to the Egyptians, caused boils upon them. So that was a tremendous miracle in the plague of boils. Next, the plague of hail, the seventh plague, Barad. Why were the Egyptians punished to have hail? So the answer given by the Midrash is that the Egyptians didn't allow the Jewish people to plant their own gardens or vineyards. And the reason why they didn't let them do this is because they didn't want the Jews to engage in any marital relations in privacy, maybe even in the gardens or vineyards, because at home they were always going back and forth and not letting anyone engage in any marital activity. So what happened, as the Midrash tells us, is that they used to go into the gardens and the vineyards. Not only would they have relations there, but they would also give birth over there. And the gardens and the vineyards would even keep the babies, many of the babies, for some time to spare them from the unfortunate death sentence for all the baby boys. Nevertheless, the Egyptians did everything at all costs, at all of their power, to not allow the Jews to plant or have any gardens or vineyards. So since they were diminishing in that, then God came and he sent hail to destroy all of their gardens and vineyards, all of the Egyptians' gardens and vineyards. The Kli Yakar gives a different answer, and he says that there was a loud boom every single time hail hit something, obviously like little missiles or huge missiles. And this boom, this sound, was coming to answer Pharaoh's disgusting question or even statement. Listen to the following. I'm sharing you the verse. The verse is in right here. Chapter 5, verse 2. The verse says that Pharaoh says, Mi Hashem asher shma bekolo. Who's God that I should hear his voice, that I should listen to him, Lishalach et Israel, that I should send out the Jewish nation. Lo yadati et Hashem, v'gam et Israel lo ashalech. I don't know who this God is, and I'm not going to send out the Jewish people either. You see how it says, Vayomer mi Hashem, who is God, asher ishma b'kolo, that I should listen to his voice. You know what? God showed his voice, so to say, through the booms and the noise of all of the hail coming down, says the Kli Yakar, and that was why they were punished with Barad, because this sound would really gain Pharaoh's attention to listen to God. Next, the damages included in this tremendous plague was the damages were sent. The hail hit people, as well as animals. Obviously, the Egyptian people and the Egyptian animals, their plants, their gardens, and even their trees. Miracles included, according to the Midrash, that no hail at all fell in Eretz Goshen, where the Jewish people lived. The wheat and the spelt were not destroyed. Couple reasons why. One is to leave a little bit of food for the locust, which we're going to come up in the next plague, and also to make sure that there's plenty of wheat and spelt for matzah for the Jews on their way out. Next is that the hail came down very strong, and there were huge pieces of ice which kind of jailed in and blocked in Egypt, that none of the Egyptians could run away. There's the famous Yalkut Reuveni that tells us that it was fire and water which are contracting, basically different in nature against each other. They can't coexist. They coexisted in these balls of fire and water, and basically ice, to come down and attack. The Brisker Rav gives us an amazing chidush. Listen to this. Every single missile of hail was a direct hit, meaning it only fell on Egyptian people, or on Egyptian animals, or on their vegetation. It wasn't like anything fell out in the middle of nowhere. Everything was a direct hit, which was a proof from God, which is very interesting to the exact opposite of when, unfortunately, our Arab terrorist neighbors in Israel send missiles to the Jews. Most, if not all the time, but most of the time, they are completely missed because God is watching us. Of course, we have technology, and the Iron Dome helps tremendously, but this is even before the Iron Dome. Very famous stories that up to 100 or 200 missiles falling in a certain place, and Baruch Hashem, not one person having a direct hit. And actually, there was one person, there's a famous story in Bnei Brak, I don't remember exactly the names, of one rabbi who told everybody to not worry about it, stay home, but don't worry about it. And there was one person who would speak out against this rabbi. He said, what's this rabbi telling me? He went out and he had a direct hit because he was going against the rabbi. A very interesting story. Anyways, the next plague, the plague of locust, Arbeh, the 8th plague. So why would God send locusts to the Egyptians? Why would he punish them in that manner? Tells us the Gaon Mivilna, the Gra. He says that the Egyptians forced the Jews to plant wheat and barley. So you know what God did? He sent locusts to come and eat all of that from them. So they wouldn't be able to benefit from it, even after the fact. Second answer is that the Egyptians would steal food from the Jews. And therefore the locusts came and ate up all of that food that they would steal from the Jews. The damages included in this plague were, number one, as the Midrash Haggadah says, that the locust entered all of the storehouses, the silos of the Egyptians, and ate all of their grain and their food and all their preservatives. They also ate their clothes and their jewels and their jewelry. It was a horrible plague for the Egyptians. Rabbi Yeshua Leib Diskin tells us that the locusts were all blind. Now, what does that mean? As we all know, I don't want to give a percentage because I guess it's different for every person. I guess statistically or scientifically it could be proven maybe otherwise of what I'm going to say. But let's just say for argument's sake there's a 50% reason why a person gets full is because we eat with our eyes. If people who are blind happen to eat more, and the reason for that is because they're not being satiated fully because they don't see what they eat. So God sent as a tremendous miracle that all of these locusts would come blind and keep on eating because they were never satisfied, eating everything away from the Egyptians. There were so many of them that the Midrash tells us that that Egypt was dark. This is the plague before darkness, and Egypt was even dark here. And the fourth is that they also ate all of the trees in Egypt, again wiping out Egypt. This was a very, very big hit on the Egyptians. Miracles included that the Egyptians were somewhat happy with the locusts because it was a delicacy, and they thought, okay, once this plague is over, they're all going to die, and we'll have plenty of finger food and delicacies to eat for years and years to come. No. God didn't let the locusts die and finish off over there. Rather, he sent a strong, strong wind and blew them out to the point where there was not even one locust left in the entire region of Egypt. Moving on to the 9th plague, the famous plague of darkness. Why would God punish the Egyptian people with the plague of darkness? So the Kliyakar answers that the Jews would hide their children in the dark in order that the Egyptians wouldn't come and take them and kill them. or throw them in the Nile River. So God punished them and says, you forced my children, the Bnei Israel, to hide their children in the dark. You're going to be in the dark. Miracles included, as the Midrash says, 2 different parts to the plague. The first 3 days of the plague, which were just very, very dark, and the second 3 days were that the Egyptians were dark and stuck, meaning anyone who was standing was stuck standing. They couldn't move. Anyone who was sitting was stuck sitting. They were paralyzed on top of the darkness, because the darkness got very, very thick, as the Torah tells us. Another miracle is that any Jew, similar to the water, wherever a Jew was, there was light. Even if a Jew and a non-Jew were next to each other, the Jew saw and was able to move, and the Egyptian wasn't. The third miracle that was included in this plague was that God specifically made it so dark that the Egyptians couldn't see all of the evil, non-believing Jews pass away during this plague, which was up to 80% of the Jewish population at that time. All of those who didn't believe, even after 8 plagues, they still didn't believe. A lot of them died, and the Jews buried them over these 6 days. The reason, anything else? Yes, another reason why, another great miracle was that God made it dark here in order that the Jews would be able to go, as he told Moses to tell the Jewish people, to go and take jewels and gold and silver from the Egyptians as a payment for all of the slave labor that they worked over the past 210 years, and which would fulfill the great promise that God told Abraham that they would leave, Birchush Gadol, with a tremendous amount of wealth. Moving on to the final plague, and this is the 10th plague, Makat Bechorot, the slaying of the firstborn. And why did God slay their firstborn? Is there a specific reason? The Kli Yakar gives a fascinating answer. I'm going to share with you the verse he tells us. The verse is found in chapter 4, verse 22 in Exodus. It says, V'amarta el Paro. God tells Moses, go tell Paro, כה אמר Hashem beni bechori Israel. So said the Lord, my firstborn son is Israel. From here we learn that just as a person is so enthusiastic and loves, I don't want to say loves more your firstborn, but your firstborn is something special. It's your first. It was the first time you were a parent. God relates to the Jewish people, says the Kli Yakar, as his firstborn, as he clearly tells Moses. And that is what gives us a seemingly superiority opposed to the rest of the nations. Now, of course, it comes with responsibility, and it comes with a lot of obligation, but nevertheless, the Jews are still referred to as God's firstborn. So therefore, God said, you are trying to come and wipe out my firstborn? I'm going to come after your firstborns. We obviously know that amongst these miracles, Paro himself, who was a firstborn, was spared. God did this deliberately in order that Paro will see the end of the story, which was his downfall and his everlasting downfall. Other miracles include, as the Midrash says, every firstborn, including those which were in neonatal, meaning they were fetuses in their mother's stomach. They also passed as their firstborns. Egyptians were so angry. There was like some type of a civil rivalry that Egyptians started killing each other because they were angry at Paro. Like, how stubborn is Paro going to be that even our that we had 9 plagues and now our firstborns are dying? It's too close to home. It's very, very severe. And they started fighting with each other. The Egyptian people started fighting with their superiors and their taskmasters. Why is Paro so stubborn? Another miracle was that every Egyptian firstborn was slayed, including the Egyptians which found themselves in the Jewish homes. Even Egyptians who were abroad, as Rashi tells us, they were not in Egypt at that time, and even other nationalities which were there either on vacation or they were refugees, all of their firstborns passed away as well, because how can they be a bystander to a genocide and just stay quiet? One more miracle, and then we'll move on, is that the firstborn calculations that God made for the Makat Bechorot, the slaying of the firstborn, was a firstborn from any new relationship. Meaning, if 2 people were married, obviously that's their first child. But even if it was a second marriage of someone else, or if someone, God forbid, cheated on their spouse, and that was a firstborn child to that new relationship, that child would die as well. So it's very weird. People, Egyptians at home, that they would have 5 kids, 3 of the kids would drop dead. Well, how so? Well, if not all of them. How so? Well, because both of them, the husband and the wife, were not faithful to each other, and these children were not really their children. So they were first born to many relationships. Many children were dying, not only one per household. Okay, after finishing the 10 plagues, sorry, not even finishing, doing a quick overview of the 10 plagues, because there's a lot more to say about, we're going to continue with the Haggadah. Tonight's goal, we have 25 more minutes, is to finish off the whole Maggid, meaning that's including the drinking of the second cup. So this way next week, we can move on to the washing of the hands, Motzi Matzah, and the rest of the Haggadah, so we'll be able to finish it, hopefully, in time for Pesach, before Passover. Okay, now we're moving on to the next part of the Haggadah, and right after these 10 plagues are said, along with the pouring of the water and the wine, this water should be poured out. This wine and water should be poured out in the bathroom. This water, according to the Kabbalah, according to the mystical teachings, has a lot of impurities in them, and therefore they should be poured down the sink, the toilet, whatever, but in the restroom. Please have in mind when you're doing the pourings, it's not just 10 times, it's the 3 before, and then it's those 3 after, so you're really pouring 16 times. Pay attention. At the finishing of the last time that we pour, we should make sure that that 16th time, all of the wine in the cup should be poured into the bowl, finishing off, finishing off in Egypt at 100%. One more beautiful thing, and there's a tradition that anyone who is not married in the household and is looking to get married should spill out that bowl, and it is a segula, a good luck for them to get married even that very own year. I've seen many of those miracles. It doesn't work every time, obviously, but it is a tradition, it is a segula, something that should be done. After that's poured out, anyone, and specifically the leader of the Seder, and if anyone else didn't do it yet, this is the time to fill up the second cup. Just to give it a second cup, right? Coffee? No, not coffee. With wine, obviously. But it's time to finish to fill up your second cup of wine. And just to give a recap of what needs to be done every time we fill up our cups of wine for the Seder night is, number 1, they need to be rinsed inside and out, not dried, leave as is. Fill them up, but don't fill them up yourself. Everyone should fill someone else up, as that is their cherut. That's how free people, that's royalty. And 3 drops of water should be added afterwards, as we've explained in our previous classes. At this point, you just put the cup back down on the table, and then there are, the Haggadah quotes to us 3 different opinions of how many plagues actually took place and were the Egyptians punished with. And there were plagues not only at in Egypt, but there are also plagues at the sea. I'm just going to tell you them briefly, and then we'll go through them. Rabbi Yossi HaGalili says that there were 10 plagues, just as the Torah says, in Egypt. However, there were 5 times that at the sea, and he proves it from verses. We'll look at it in a moment. The next Tana, Rabbi Eliezer, says there were 40 plagues. Really, there were 4 elements to each of the 10 plagues in Egypt, and 5 times that there were 200 plagues at the sea. Rabbi Akiva, the final opinion, says there were 5 elements or dimensions to each of the 10 plagues, giving 50 plagues in Egypt and 250 plagues at the sea. So I don't think there's a point in reading the whole section over here. However, it's Rabbi Yossi HaGalili says, Minayin ata omer, how do we know? And it tells us how we know how many plagues there were, and then he proves that it should be 5 times that from the words Etzba Elokim, which have 5 fingers to it, and God administered with his finger. Obviously, God doesn't have a hand or have fingers, and because of that, he learns you times 5 it for how many plagues were at the sea. And each of the sages do that. We don't need to read that together, but that's Rabbi Yossi HaGalili, Rabbi Eliezer, and then Rabbi Akiva. Next is one of a favorite for many households, and that is the singing of Dayenu. I know everyone's on mute, so you're going to have to be bored with my own voice as we go. Dayenu, Dayenu. Oh, Ron Friedman's on. Ron, do you want to sing for us? Okay, Ron, let's hear your voice. All right, he's shy. Dayenu is the next part of our Haggadah, and the Dayenu is a beautiful, beautiful chant recounting the many wonders and favors, wonderful favors and miracles that God did for the Jewish people. So I'm going to read this part. It's Kama ma'alot tovot lamakom alenu, which is translated as, look how many wonderful favors that God has done on our behalf, on behalf of the Jewish people. And then we go through specifically 15 different wonders and miracles that God did for the Jewish people. We're going to read through them, and we're going to explain each and every one of them, and there's going to be a specific two that we're going to focus in a little more on. One of them is in specific, but why 15 favors, 15 miracles specifically are we thanking God for? And we're going to read them in a moment, but let's just get this done. Let's just focus on these two questions first. Why 15? And then what is the meaning of the word dayenu? So why 15? We have three different answers. The first answer is given by the Rebbe Yakar. He says that there were 15. We're just mentioning the 15 miracles God did for the Jewish people during Exodus. That's simple. The Abetz, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, explains that there's 15 stairs in the temple, in the Bet HaMikdash, where the Levi'im would stand on and they would sing praise. Corresponding to those 15 stairs, we are thanking God for the 15 miracles that he did, or the 15 stairs corresponding to 15 miracles. Also, just so we know, there's 15 harachamans that we are praising God for his mercy, and that we are pleading God for his mercy in our Birkat HaMazon, specifically for this reason. 15 harachamans at the end of the Birkat HaMazon, 15 stairs that the Leviim stood on to sing, and 15 miracles and wonders that God did for us. The last answer the Ritva says is that 15 is really the name of God. Where do we see that? We see that in Yeshayahu, chapter 26, verse 4. It says, Bitchu b'Adonai ad adead, ki beyah Adonai tzur olamim. Trust in the Lord forever, for Yah, which is one of God's names, the Lord, is the rock of eternity. Yud and Hey, 10 and 5 is the numerical value of 15. So God, we are praising God with his name, the number 15, for these very beautiful wonders and wonderful favors that he did for the Jewish people. What is the meaning of the word dayenu? So dayenu, loosely translated, means it would have been enough. So that's how the Abu Draham explains, that it would have been enough if you would have done this, even if you wouldn't have done the next. The Malbim gets a little deeper, and the Malbim says that one miracle would be good enough, but now that God did all of these miracles, all the more so how much we have to thank him for. Rabbi Yechezkel Levenstein, he says, a little bit different, a little deeper, he says that one miracle alone would have been a good enough reason to strengthen our emunah, our belief in God. Now that God gave us 15 nisim, 15 miracles, 15 reasons to strengthen our emunah, our trust, our belief in God, no Jew should ever have any reason or any answers on not having strong emunah and belief in God. And that would have been good enough. Meaning one miracle would have been good enough to have emunah in God. Now that God did 15, nobody has an excuse, says Rabbi Yechezkel Levenstein. Now, let's read through all 15 of them, and then I'm going to pause at two specifically. It's going to be number 11, and let me just see again, and number 12. Okay, get ready. Or really number 13. Look at this. Number 1, Ilu hotzianu mitzrayim, if God would have just taken us out of Egypt, v'lo asa bahem shefatim, and he wouldn't have done all of the great judgment that he executed for the Egyptian people, dayenu, that would have been good enough. That's number 1. Number 2, Ilu asa bahem shefatim, if he would have just judged and executed his judgment on the Egyptian people, v'lo asa belohem, and he wouldn't have done so also to the gods of the Egyptians, dayenu, that would have been good enough. Number 3, or that was, sorry, so it was 1, taking out of Egypt, 2, executing judgment, 3, even to their gods, 4, ilu asa belohem, even if God would have done, if he would have stopped and just attacked their gods, velo haragid bechorehem, and not have slain their firstborns, dayenu, that would have been good enough as well. Number 5, ilu haragid bechorehem, if God would have just slain their firstborns, velo natan lanu et mamonam, and wouldn't have given us all of their wealth and all of their money, dayenu, that would have been good enough. Number 6, even if God would have just given us the Jews, the Egyptians' money, velo kara lanu et hayam, and He wouldn't have split the sea for us, that would have been good enough. Ilu kara lanu et hayam, if God wouldn't have split the, if we would have just split the sea for us, velo eviranu betocho bechareva, and He wouldn't have us pass through on dry land, that would have been good enough. Dayenu. If God would have just had us pass by the sea of reeds, and He wouldn't have drowned our enemies, the Egyptians, in it, that would have been good enough too. Dayenu. Number 9. If He would have drowned the Egyptians in there, and He wouldn't have sustained the Jewish people for 40 years in the desert, that would have been good enough. Meaning, I'm going a little quick, but even if God would have just saved us from Egypt and drowned the Egyptians in the river, in the sea of reeds, and He wouldn't have taken care of us for the next 40 years, that would have been good enough. Now, the fact that He took care of us for the next 40 years makes it even greater. Now, number 10, even if God would have taken care of us, all our needs for 40 years in the desert, He wouldn't have given us man. Maybe He would have given us something else, not the Wonder Bread. Dayenu, that would have been good enough. Number 11, this is one that we're going to focus on. Even if God would have given us the man, that would have been good enough. But if He wouldn't have given us, that would have been good enough. Meaning, the fact that God gave us the manna is enough for us to thank Him for. Even if He wouldn't have given us the mitzvah or the gift of Shabbat. To this we ask, well, why is Shabbat the only mitzvah mentioned out of our 613 mitzvot over here in the Dayenu part, in the miracles that God did for us? So we have two answers. The first answer, the Ra'avan says, is that Shabbat is a sign, it's a covenant between the God and the Jewish people. One that was forged even before Mount Sinai, and that's why it is mentioned over here. Another answer is that the Shabbat observance is equal to all other mitzvot, as the Talmud says. One who keeps Shabbat is fulfilling all 613 mitzvot. That is the power of Shabbat. So Shabbat was deliberately chosen because it's there to show us that all the mitzvot that God gave us is so amazing. And Shabbat is just a sample one, which is equivalent to the rest. Number 12. If God would have just given us Shabbat, He wouldn't have brought us close to Mount Sinai, that would have been good enough. Number 13. If God would have just brought us to Mount Sinai, and He wouldn't have given us the Torah, Dayenu. So let's just focus on this for a moment. If God would have brought us to Mount Sinai, but He wouldn't have given us the Torah, that would have been good enough. Let me ask you, what was the point of coming to Mount Sinai? Obviously to get the Torah. So why are we singing every single year? In the diaspora, twice a year, right? 2 nights, we're singing, God, thank you. If you would have just brought us to Mount Sinai and then dropped us there, like just left us there, that would have been good enough without giving us the Torah. Excuse me. I want to share, and these answers are so beautiful, so beautifully illustrated by the Ben Ish Chai in his Haggadah. I'm going to share, he has 2 different answers, and he has a parable to go with each of the answers. This can be found on page 164 and 165. I'm going to do it quite briefly. We only have 10 minutes left, and then I still have more to go to finish off. So let's do this as brief as possible. Question's clear, right? The question is, why are we singing praise to God? That if He would have brought us to Mount Sinai and not given us the Torah, that would have been good enough. Isn't the whole point of coming to Mount Sinai to receive the Torah? It doesn't seem like there's any benefit in coming to Mount Sinai. To that, the Ben Ish Chai's first answer is, really, coming to Mount Sinai in and of itself did bring a benefit to the Jewish people. As the Talmud in Masechet Nedarim says, and I'm going to quote it, if anyone lacks the attribute of shame, it is clearly known that their forefathers did not stand at Mount Sinai. Based on this, the Ben Ish Chai explains that Mount Sinai brought shame, humility, and unity to the Jewish people, and he explains it through a beautiful parable. He says, one time there was a country bumpkin who was walking by a very fancy shop. And it was a beautiful suit shop with a tailor. He walked in, and with his raggedy clothes, he walks in, obviously not smelling too great, and he says, I would like to try on one of your beautiful garments. So, the salesman, the tailor, takes him over, brings him to the back. He shows him whatever he thinks he could afford, pulls out a couple pieces, and brings him to the back, to the changing room. And the salesman leaves the gentleman in the back with the clothes, and 5 minutes comes, the guy doesn't step out. 10 minutes, nothing happens. 15 minutes later, the salesman hears this country bumpkin screaming his head off in the changing room, help, 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 help! To which, maybe against law nowadays, the salesman barges through the curtain or the door to find this country bumpkin trying to fit this beautifully and rich and expensive clothes, trying to be fit on top of this country bumpkin's rags. So the tailor looks at him and says, you got it all wrong. You gotta first take off your old clothes in order to put on the new ones. And with this, the Ben Ish Chai explains the moral and the special addition and gift which was given to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. When the Jews stood at Mount Sinai, they stood, Vayichan Sham Neged Hahar, the Torah says. God says that they stood there in a singular form. Rashi explains that it should have said Vayichanu, in a plural form. No, they were there singular. Why? Rashi says, Ish echad belev echad. They came with one intention, one and only intention, to see God and to receive His Torah. That unity that was brought to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, the Ben Ish Chai explains, was worth just coming to Mount Sinai even without getting the Torah. So there is a benefit in coming to Mount Sinai that also, when the Jews came to Mount Sinai, just like that country bumpkin, God had to rid them of their bad character traits, of their selfishness, of their slave mentality, and give them shame and humility. And this is what the Talmud says, and this is how the Ben Ish Chai answers what was the benefit of coming to Mount Sinai. Number one, to give them the shame, ridding them of their old traits, like removing that garment, and giving them humility, as well as giving them unity. That's this first answer. The second answer the Ben Ish Chai gives is, in truth, God could have just given us a law book as His Torah. Instead of us having a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch as a addition to our Torah, that could have been our Torah. 613 lines, not even pages, 613 lines, line items of what our mitzvot are, which would be very dry and very boring. The fact that God gave us the Torah the way we have it, with all its depth, is something which is a tremendous gift to us. When the Jews came to Mount Sinai, just coming to Mount Sinai enabled them to receive the law book. But then God said, I'm going to do something much greater. I'm going to give you a book with depth, a book with stories to learn from, our patriarchs, the creation of the world, and everything else that is in our Torah. He gives a beautiful parable to express the sweetness and the depth of our Torah. I'm going to do it quick because it is a little long in here, but I'm going to do it as quick. There was a fellow, a very wealthy fellow, who was a very large landowner, and his business, his real estate, was very, very successful. He had multiple fields, and the fields every single year without fail produced tremendous amounts of produce and sold at a great, great profits. On this man's deathbed, I'm going to quote to you what he said. He summons his sons. It's like a famous story, right? Like every tale. The father's on his deathbed. Listen to what he says in a very flowery terminology. I'm about to pass away, so please heed my words. I have buried a treasure in the furrow of the irrigation canal. And boom, he closes his eyes and passes away. At that point, all the children are like, but father, what do you mean by that? What do you mean? What do you mean? And he passed away. The Shiva passed, 7 days goes on. And what do the children do? They pick up, they get up, and they start digging out the canals. Tremendously. They found nothing. Absolutely nothing. They dug some more, they dug some more, they dug some more. They found no treasure. And they're saying, well, if our father told us this as his last words, it must be very, very important. He must have a treasure chest full of jewels that we have not found yet. Anyways, rainy season came, and it rained, and the canals filled, and as every single year, the produce of the fields was bountiful and very profitable. The next year came around once the canals dried up, and they dug and dug and dug and dug and dug and dug, and they found nothing again. Same thing happened. It rained, the canals got full, the fields were full, very profitable. Third year, they were thinking to themselves, is our father mocking us? What's going on? How could there not be a treasure if that was the last thing he told us to do? And the third year came around, and they gave up on their father's last words. They did nothing. They didn't dig for anything. They didn't look for anything. That year when it rained, the canals filled up very shallow, and the produce was not so strong. They didn't have as much of a benefit and a gain that year because they didn't work so hard. You see, the father, before passing away, didn't leave anything there. If he would have told his children, you want to continue the great wealth and business that we have? Dig out those canals. The kids would have got lazy and not done any of it. The only way the father was able to convince his kids to continue working hard, as is with every second generation business, right? Everything falls on the children's laps. It's the first generation that worked hard. The father knew the secret to success. It was getting up early in the morning and staying up late at night when it wasn't rainy season to dig and dig and dig those canals. He was trying to impart that to his children. He couldn't just tell them to do it. He told them that there was a treasure there because it was the treasure. The very treasure to their field was the digging, was that depth. It says the Ben Ish Chai, you know what our great treasure is? It's not just the laws that we have in our Torah. It's the depth that our Torah has. The questions, the answers, the understandings, the stories. All of that depth and understanding of God is the great gift of our Torah. So his answer is, coming to Mount Sinai would have given us a law book. But Mount Sinai revelation itself, Matan Torah, gave us something way deeper than that. As deep as digging in that canal, as that great treasure. Moving on, we move on to the next part, which is a paragraph which summarizes all 15 of them. Okay, so let's do, that was 13. 14 is, if you would have given us the Torah, God, and not brought us into Israel, that would have been good enough. And the 15th is, if you would have brought us into Israel, and you wouldn't have built us the temple, given us the temple, that would have been good enough also. Okay? Now, then we have a next paragraph saying a recount of all 15 of these at once, and then we move on to the 6th section of the Maggid portion, which is the very famous Rabban Gamliel saying. Rabban Gamliel in the Talmud says that anyone who did not say these 3 words has not fulfilled their obligation. And the 3 words are the very famous Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. The Paschal sacrifice, the Matzah, and the bitter herbs. So, what type of obligation does one not fulfill according to Rabban Gamliel if they don't say these words? The Rashbam says, well, there's more to just saying these words. There's the obligation of actually eating these things. The Paschal sacrifice nowadays not, but the matzah and the maror, one may feel that they could fulfill just eating them. No. You're not just eating a cracker, and you're not just eating a bitter herb. What you're doing is you're eating something that you need to understand. So when Rabban Gamliel goes to explain each of these 3, that is how we are fulfilling the obligation properly. The Machzor Vitri says that these 3 items, Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, are a true reminder of the story of the Exodus in brief. And that is the great obligation that we are fulfilling by saying these 3. So, Pesach is the first. We only look at it. We don't lift the Seder plate, and we don't lift it itself, because then we may be, as we know, it's just an example of what the Paschal sacrifice was. It's not the sacrifice itself. So therefore we only look at it, and we don't pick it up. Then let's read it. Pesach shayu avotenu. This is the Paschal sacrifice that our ancestors would eat in the time of the Beit HaMikdash. Why would they eat it? Al shum shepasach HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because God passed over. That's what Pesach is, right? That's why the holiday is called Passover, because God passed over the firstborn Jews and only attacked the firstborn and slayed the firstborn Egyptians. That's why we eat the Pesach sacrifice. The next is the matzah. The matzah is lifted, because this is the very same matzah to fulfill the mitzvah 100%. The top matzah, the full matzah, is the one that should be lifted. And let's read why. Why do we have the matzah? Because al shum shalei speak batsekam shalavotenu lachmitz, because the dough of our ancestors did not have time to rise, and God, in a hurry, told them to leave. As well as the Abu Draham tells us that God commanded the Jews to leave in a hurry. Let me share the verse with you. The verse is in Exodus chapter 12, verse 18. Barishon barba asar yom lachodesh ba'erev tochelu matzot ad yom ha'echad ve'esrim lachodesh ba'arev. Why do we eat matzah? Besides for that it was a command, besides for this is what our ancestors ate, to remind us of their poverty, it's also because God commands us to eat the matzah, so it's important to have that in mind as well when we are eating our matzah. That is when it comes to the matzah. The maror, the reason, what we do is we actually raise the bitter herbs, whatever you use for bitter herbs, you raise the bitter herbs for all to see as well. And why do we eat the bitter herbs? Because the Egyptians made our life bitter in Egypt, so that's why we eat the bitter herbs to remind us of that. I want to share, we're almost done, we're really almost done. I want to share with everybody a fascinating parable the Ben Ish Chai gives on the importance and the power of these three items, Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, and their significance on the night of the Passover Seder. This can be found on page 178. It is a very, very, very meaningful story, a parable that he gives. He gives the story of a king who was once riding outside the walls of his palace, and he saw a poor child left on the side of the road. He looked at the boy, his heart felt out for him, and he told his men that were with him, his servants, to pick him up and put him on his horse. He took the young boy home, he educated him with the best teachers, he raised him as royalty. It was literally the kid's ticket to heaven, literally. And the kid grew and grew and grew and was very wise, very trustworthy, to the point where the king nominated this young boy, who was no longer a young boy now, he was a lad, to the treasury, to being in charge of his very own treasury. And at that point, the other ministers were very jealous of this young boy. He was not of noble blood, he was nothing special, he was found on the side of the road, and they started putting out horrible rumors about this boy who was stealing from the king and doing all types of horrible things. And the king could never, every time these rumors came up, the king was always disqualifying them, because he said, this boy could never do that to me, he must be faithful to me, look, I gave him his life. Until the rumors started getting too crazy, the king himself went to the boy's house to investigate with his own eyes. And he comes in, and he doesn't say why he's there. And the boy welcomes him in, shows him around, and the king looks around and finds absolutely nothing. On his way out, the king sees a room near the front door, and he tries to open it. It's the only room he didn't go into, and it was locked. And the king tries again, and it's locked, and he demands, he says, open it. And the boy says, no, you don't need to go there. Now the king's suspicion grew. He's like, that's where all my gold must be. And he says, I demand in the name of the king to open this door. And the boy opened it against his will. And the king walks in, and to his great surprise, after expecting to see gold and jewels, all he sees were three items. He sees specifically a bag, a flute, and a staff. And he walks in there and he looks at the boy and he says, I demand an explanation for this. And the boy says, if you insist, Your Highness. He said, ever since you took me, you gave me a new life. You changed my fate forever. And what I did from that very first day that you took me is I saved the only three things I had, which was an empty bag, a staff, and a flute. And every single day, twice a day, morning and evening, I come into this room and I remind myself where I was and where I would be at best, if not dead, if it wasn't for you, my king. And I praise you twice a day. And this is what King David, the Midrash says, had in mind when he minted his coins. You see, when King David minted his coins, on one side he had the royal tower, the Tower of David. On the other side, he had a bag and a staff, reminding himself that he's only a shepherd. That's where he came from. And never to have any arrogance come up and stay in his humble way. To this, the Ben Ish Chai explains, you know why we have Pesach and Matzah and Maror? Because these are the three things that remind us of our exodus. These are the three things that remind us of where we were, where we came from. Yes, we have Zecher Litziat Mitzrayim minimum twice a day. Every time we say Shema, in the morning and in the evening. Guess what? Every single Kiddush, every Shabbat prayer has Zecher Litziat Mitzrayim in commemoration and remembering our exodus. But today, on Passover, is the day, the Seder night is the day where we truly remember with the great signs, the Pesach, the Matzah, and the Maror, where we were and that God took us out. And this is why the Passover as a sign of redemption, the Matzah as a sign of the bread of affliction, and the Maror as a sign of bitterness. To this, the Ben Ish Chai explains that's why there's two names to this festival. There's Chag HaPesach, and there's also Chag HaMatzot. One referring to the redemption, and one referring to the affliction. And that is why we have these three things mentioned, these three things which are the main focus of our Seder. Meaning, if you have a Seder and you're with people that are maybe not too involved or know too much, make sure these three things you make a big deal about: the Pesach, the Matzah, and the Maror. The next paragraph is where we mention the Chol Dor Vador, every single generation. Each and every one of us have an obligation to imagine as if we left Egypt ourselves. As the Torah tells us, we would be there still today as slaves to Paro if God would not have taken us out. Now we move on to the 7th out of the 8 portions of Maggid, and that is the reciting of the first part of Hallel. We cover the matzot at this moment, we raise the second cup, which is already full, and we hold it until the end of this portion of Hallel, ending with a blessing, the bracha of Gal Yisrael, where we recline and where we drink the second cup. So no blessing is made on this part of the Hallel, because as we mentioned in previous classes, the blessing of Hallel is recited at the end of Arvit when we recite the complete Hallel. When we make that blessing on the Hallel in the end of Arvit, we should also have in mind the Hallel that we will mention in the Haggadah. So therefore we continue with Lefikach, Anachnu Chayavim, therefore we're here to praise God, and we're not going to read through it, but this is the first portion of the Hallel that we normally sing, which are Psalms of David, and then we end off with the 8th portion of our Maggid, which is the blessing of Ga'al Yisrael, where we say Baruch Hashem Elokeinu Melech Ga'alenu, Asher Ga'alanu, V'Ga'al et Avotenu, God redeemed us, saved us, and also our ancestors, and brought us to this very special night, and we are thanking God, and we're very happy about it, and then we tell him that we're singing praise to him, and then we end off with Baruch Hashem Gal Yisrael, blessed are you God, who redeemed the Jewish people. At this point, there's two different traditions. It's either you have the Sephardic tradition, and you go straight to, after mentioning this blessing, you recline and you drink the second cup, remembering to the left. The Ashkenaz tradition is to make another blessing of Borei Pri HaGefen. Meaning, even though the first blessing of Geffen was made on the first cup, and should, in essence, take care of this cup, however, and that's why the Sephardim don't, the Ashkenazim hold that every single cup has its own significance and praise and prayer, and that's why another blessing is made. So, with this, we end tonight's class, finishing off Maggid, and next class we will get into the washing of the hands, the motzi, the matzah, the maror, the sandwich, and further on from there. So we'd like to thank everybody who's joined us. Let me turn off the recording, and I'm sure we have some questions. Give me a moment.